Listen closely, my friends. There is a moment that changes the balance of power in every conversation, and almost nobody notices when it arrives. It lasts less than a second. In that tiny space, most people make the same mistake. They rush to defend themselves. They explain. They argue. They try to prove they are right. And without realizing it, they surrender control to the very person trying to manipulate them. But there is another kind of person, the kind history remembers, the kind whose silence makes a room uncomfortable, the kind who never needs to fight for respect because their presence demands it before they ever speak. When everyone else reacts, they remain still. When everyone else loses control, they gain it. And with one calm sentence, they end arguments that would have trapped everyone else for hours. The Stoics understood this secret over 2,000 years ago. These were not men who lived peaceful lives. They were emperors carrying the weight of entire civilizations, philosophers sentenced to exile, teachers born into slavery, and senators standing before tyrants who could order their deaths with a single word. Yet they discovered something more powerful than anger, louder than shouting, and stronger than fear. They learned that the greatest victory is not defeating another person. It is becoming impossible to control. Today, I am going to give you 7 responses that can completely change the way people see you. These are not clever comebacks. They are psychological weapons sharpened by centuries of Stoic wisdom and tested in situations far more dangerous than the ones we face today. Used correctly, they do not simply end arguments. They expose manipulators, silence bullies, and make controlling people realize they have lost without you ever raising your voice. Stay with me until the very end, because the 7th response is the one most people never have the courage to use. It is so simple that almost everyone overlooks it, yet it has the power to end manipulation faster than any insult, any debate, or any emotional outburst ever could. Once you hear it, you will never walk into another difficult conversation the same way again. Response number 1. Never compete with volume. I do not compete with volume, I compete with truth. The first mistake almost everyone makes in an argument is believing that the loudest person is automatically the strongest. That illusion has destroyed more relationships, careers, and opportunities than most people realize. The moment someone raises their voice, your instincts tell you to match their energy, to defend yourself louder, faster, harder. But that is exactly the battlefield they want you to enter, because people who rely on volume rarely rely on truth. Imagine you are sitting in a meeting explaining an idea you spent days preparing. Suddenly a co-worker cuts you off, talks over you, and begins speaking louder with every sentence. Everyone in the room turns toward the noise. In that moment it feels as if silence means defeat. But the Stoics understood something the modern world keeps forgetting. The person who controls the pace of the conversation almost always controls the conversation itself. So instead of raising your voice, do the opposite. Slow down. Let a brief silence fill the room. Make people lean in instead of pulling away. Then say calmly and without emotion, I do not compete with volume, I compete with truth. That single sentence changes the entire frame. You are no longer competing with the loudest person in the room. You are inviting everyone else to notice who is actually in control. Epictetus, born into slavery and later respected by emperors, taught that anyone who needs to shout to be believed has already revealed their greatest weakness. Confidence never begs for attention. Truth never races to be heard. Only insecurity believes that volume creates authority. The wiser you become, the quieter your certainty becomes. Picture a mountain standing beneath a violent storm. Thunder shakes the sky. Wind tears through the trees. Rain crashes against the rock with everything it has. Yet when morning comes, the storm is gone, and the mountain is exactly where it was before. That is what Stoicism asks you to become. Not the storm that exhausts itself trying to prove its power, but the mountain that never needed to prove it in the first place. Here is the hidden psychology behind this response. Most aggressive people are not searching for truth. They are searching for a reaction. The moment you become angry, defensive, or emotional, they know they have entered your mind. But when you answer with calm certainty instead of emotional resistance, you deny them the reward they came looking for. Their momentum begins to collapse because they are suddenly fighting someone who refuses to play by their rules. The next time someone tries to dominate you with volume, remember this: your goal is never to become louder than them. Your goal is to become calmer than them, because people rarely remember who shouted the most. They remember who never lost control, and in the end, self-control will always speak louder than any voice ever could. Response number 2. Let their character speak for them. What you show me about yourself matters more than what you say about me. Not every attack comes wrapped in anger. Some of the most dangerous people never raise their voices at all. They smile while insulting you. They disguise disrespect as humor. They hide cruelty behind sarcasm. They make a cutting remark, then laugh and call it just a joke. They are not trying to win an argument. They are trying to provoke a reaction. Because the moment you become emotional, they stop talking about your words and start talking about your reaction. Imagine sitting in a meeting where a co-worker casually mocks your idea in front of everyone. Or picture a family dinner where a relative makes a passive-aggressive comment about your career, your appearance, or the life you have chosen. Everyone hears it. The room goes quiet. Every instinct inside you screams to defend yourself immediately, but that instinct is exactly what the other person is counting on. They are hoping you will react emotionally, because emotional people are far easier to control than composed ones. This is where you completely change the game. Instead of defending yourself, look at them with complete calm, not anger, not sarcasm, not superiority, just quiet certainty. Then say slowly, "What you show me about yourself matters more than what you say about me." In that single sentence, something extraordinary happens. The spotlight quietly moves away from you and lands on them. Without insulting them once, you force everyone listening to examine their behavior instead of your character. Marcus Aurelius understood this lesson better than almost anyone in history. He ruled an empire stretching across 3 continents. He faced betrayal from trusted friends, criticism from powerful senators, endless wars, disease, and unimaginable pressure. Yet in his private journal, he reminded himself of one truth again and again. The best revenge against an insult is refusing to become the kind of person who delivered it. He knew that every insult reveals far more about the speaker than the target. A bitter person speaks with bitterness. A dishonest person speaks with dishonesty. A peaceful mind has no need to humiliate anyone. History gives us another extraordinary example. Pausanias Agrippinus, one of the lesser-known Stoics, was condemned to exile by a tyrant who feared his integrity. When the news arrived, his friends expected outrage, panic, or despair. Instead, Agrippinus calmly finished his meal and simply said he would continue his daily exercise somewhere else. Think about that for a moment. A man who could lose his home without losing his peace would never allow a careless insult to steal his dignity. If exile could not disturb him, why should another person's opinion disturb you? Think about the ocean during a storm. Throw a stone into a small pond and waves spread across the entire surface. Throw that same stone into the middle of the ocean, and it disappears without leaving a trace. The stone never became smaller. The water simply became greater. Insults work exactly the same way. Small minds replay them for days. Strong minds absorb them without surrendering their peace. Your goal is not to stop people from throwing stones. Your goal is to become an ocean that no stone can disturb. There is powerful psychology behind this response. Manipulators survive by controlling the frame of the conversation. They want you defending yourself while they quietly remain unquestioned. The moment you calmly say, "What you show me about yourself matters more than what you say about me," you destroy that frame. Now everyone begins judging the behavior of the attacker instead of searching for flaws in the victim. Without realizing it, they become accountable to the very audience they hoped would support them. Remember this whenever someone insults you. Words can only define you if you accept them as your mirror. Otherwise, they become a reflection of the person speaking them. Never spend your energy proving your worth to someone whose own behavior has already revealed their character. Sometimes the strongest response is not defending your reputation. It is allowing another person's actions to quietly destroy theirs. And that leads us to the third response, because sometimes silence is not enough. Sometimes respect must become a condition for the conversation itself. Response number 3. Respect is the price of my presence. I will speak with you again once respect returns to the room. There comes a moment in certain conversations when the real subject quietly disappears. It is no longer about the misunderstanding, the mistake, or the disagreement that brought both of you there. It becomes something far more dangerous. It becomes a struggle for dominance. The other person is no longer listening to understand you. They are speaking to overpower you. They interrupt every sentence, twist every word, raise their voice, mock your character instead of addressing your point. At that moment, most people make a fatal mistake. They stay in the fight, believing endurance is strength. But the Stoics believed something entirely different. A conversation without respect is no longer a conversation. It is a battlefield disguised as one. Picture a husband and wife arguing late at night. The disagreement began over something insignificant, a forgotten promise, a missed phone call, a simple misunderstanding. But 30 minutes later, neither of them even remembers what started it. Old wounds are dragged into the room. Voices become louder. Pride replaces understanding. The goal quietly changes from solving the problem to winning the battle. This is where most relationships suffer damage that takes years to repair. Not because of the original disagreement, but because two people kept speaking long after respect had already left the room. This is the moment where you become different. You do not shout louder. You do not throw one final insult before walking away. You do not slam the door, hoping your anger will teach them a lesson. Instead, you allow silence to settle over the room. You breathe once. You look directly into their eyes without hatred, without fear, without the desperate need to be understood. Then you say slowly and with complete certainty, I will speak with you again once respect returns to the room. After that, you leave. No dramatic exit, no final speech, no emotional performance, just quiet certainty. Because people who truly value themselves never negotiate inside an environment where dignity has already disappeared. One of the greatest examples of this principle was Helvidius Priscus, a Roman senator whose integrity terrified emperors. He refused to flatter tyrants, even when he knew it could cost him everything. One emperor threatened him with death if he continued speaking honestly before the Senate. Helvidius answered with remarkable calm, He said the emperor had the power to kill him, but he did not have the power to make him live like a coward. Eventually, Helvidius was executed. Yet history remembers his courage long after it forgot the threats of the emperor who ordered his death. That is the strange power of dignity. It often survives longer than power itself. The Stoics often compared the human mind to a fortress standing high above the valley. A fortress has walls for a reason, not because it hates the people outside, but because it understands that not everyone deserves immediate access. Imagine leaving the gates wide open for anyone carrying anger, manipulation, disrespect or cruelty. It would not remain a fortress for long. It would become ruins. Your peace works exactly the same way. Every conversation is someone knocking at the gate of your mind. Wisdom is not opening the gate faster. Wisdom is deciding who deserves to enter. Modern psychology quietly confirms what the Stoics understood centuries ago. Aggressive people repeat behaviors that continue producing results. If shouting always keeps you trapped in the conversation, they unconsciously learn that shouting works. If disrespect always forces you to defend yourself, they learn disrespect is effective. But the moment disrespect immediately ends the conversation, instead of extending it, the pattern begins to collapse. You are no longer rewarding unhealthy behavior with your attention. You are teaching people that access to your presence depends on the quality of their behavior. Think of a fire burning inside a forest. Every angry sentence you answer with another angry sentence is another piece of wood thrown into the flames. The fire grows larger, hotter, more destructive. Eventually it consumes everything around it. But remove the wood, and even the fiercest fire begins to die. Arguments survive on emotional fuel. The moment you refuse to provide that fuel, the fire slowly suffocates beneath its own heat. Silence, when chosen with intention, is not surrender. It is strategy. Never forget this truth. Walking away from disrespect is not weakness. It is one of the highest forms of self-respect a human being can practice. You are not abandoning the relationship. You are protecting it from becoming something neither of you will be proud of tomorrow. The strongest people are not those who can survive endless disrespect. They are the ones who calmly decide that respect is the minimum price anyone must pay to have access to their time, their words, and their peace. And that brings us to the fourth response, because sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is realizing that not every conversation deserves an ending. Response number 4, walk away from dishonesty. I am not obligated to finish a conversation that has stopped being honest. One of the greatest lies society teaches us is that every conversation deserves an ending. It doesn't. Some conversations are never meant to reach understanding because understanding was never the goal. The other person has already decided you are guilty before you speak. They ignore facts that challenge their opinion. They twist your words the moment they leave your mouth. Every explanation becomes another opportunity to attack you. At that point, you are no longer having a conversation. You are participating in someone else's performance, and the longer you stay on that stage, the more you become a character in a story they have already written. Picture yourself sitting across from someone who keeps changing the rules every time you answer. You explain one point, and they immediately move to another. You prove one accusation false, and suddenly 3 new accusations appear. Nothing is ever resolved because resolution was never what they wanted. Their objective is simple: keep you emotionally exhausted until you eventually surrender, apologize, or begin doubting your own memory. This is how manipulation survives, not because it is intelligent, but because it keeps honest people trapped in conversations that dishonest people never intended to have honestly. The Stoics refused to play this game. They understood that truth does not fear examination, but deception fears clarity more than anything else. The moment you realize someone is no longer searching for truth, your responsibility changes. It is no longer your job to convince them. It is your job to protect your peace. That is why, with complete calm and absolute confidence, you simply say, "I am not obligated to finish a conversation that has stopped being honest." Then you leave the argument behind, not because you lost, but because wisdom knows when continuing becomes self-destruction. Seneca spent years serving under Emperor Nero, one of history's most unpredictable rulers. He witnessed how power could corrupt judgment, how pride could blind intelligent people, and how some men preferred comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. Seneca eventually realized something that changed his philosophy forever. You cannot reason a person out of a position they never reasoned themselves into. If someone's beliefs are built on ego instead of evidence, your logic will never reach them. Every new argument simply gives their ego another target to defend. Sometimes the wisest sentence is the one you never say. Imagine trying to play chess with someone who changes the rules every time they begin losing. The moment you corner their king, they decide bishops can suddenly move like queens. When that no longer works, they remove your strongest piece from the board because they simply don't like it. Would you continue playing? Of course not. You would stand up, smile politely, and recognize that you were never playing chess in the first place. You were entertaining someone who had no interest in fairness. Arguments with dishonest people work exactly the same way. They do not defeat you with better reasoning. They exhaust you with endless rule changes. Modern psychology calls this moving the goalposts. The Stoics understood the pattern centuries before psychology gave it a name. Manipulators survive by keeping you busy, proving yourself over and over again. They know that an exhausted mind eventually accepts blame simply to make the conflict end. But the moment you refuse to continue the cycle, the manipulation loses its oxygen. There is nothing left for it to feed on. Your silence becomes stronger than every explanation you never gave. Think of quicksand. The harder someone struggles to escape by fighting wildly, the deeper they sink. Survival comes from doing the opposite of instinct. You stop struggling. You become still. You move deliberately toward solid ground instead of fighting the sand itself. Dishonest conversations are emotional quicksand. Every desperate explanation pulls you deeper. Every attempt to prove your innocence traps you further inside someone else's narrative. Freedom begins the moment you stop trying to win a game designed for you to lose. Always remember this truth. Your peace is too valuable to spend proving obvious facts to people committed to misunderstanding them. You were never born to become a full-time defense lawyer for your own character. People determined to misunderstand you will always find another accusation. People committed to understanding you will never need endless explanations. Learn to recognize the difference. It will save you years of unnecessary conflict. And now we arrive at the fifth response, perhaps the most dangerous one of all, because this is the response that quietly dismantles guilt, the favorite weapon of people who cannot control you any other way. Response number 5. Guilt is not love. I hear your feelings, but I will not betray myself to comfort them. There is one form of manipulation that almost never sounds aggressive. It doesn't arrive through shouting, insults, or threats. It arrives through disappointment, through silence, through a heavy sigh on the other end of the phone, through words like, "After everything I've done for you," or, "I guess I just expected more from you." On the surface, it looks like love, but beneath it, there is often something far more dangerous. Control disguised as affection, and because it wears the face of someone you care about, it becomes the hardest manipulation to recognize. Think about how many people spend their entire lives making decisions they never truly wanted to make. They choose careers to satisfy their parents, stay in relationships because they fear disappointing someone, say yes when every part of them wants to say no. They sacrifice their peace, not because they are weak, but because they confuse guilt with responsibility. Little by little, they stop living their own life and begin living inside someone else's expectations. The tragedy is that they often don't realize it until years have passed. This is where Stoicism asks you to make one of the hardest choices of your life. Not between kindness and cruelty, but between approval and integrity. So when someone tries to use guilt as a leash, you respond with calm compassion, never anger. You simply say, "I hear your feelings, but I will not betray myself to comfort them." Notice what this response does. It acknowledges their emotions without surrendering your values. It offers empathy without offering control. That is the difference between compassion and compliance. Musonius Rufus, one of the greatest Stoic teachers in Rome, believed that the purpose of philosophy was not to impress people with knowledge, but to teach them how to live honorably. He warned that a person who abandons what is right simply to avoid criticism slowly becomes a stranger to themselves. Every compromise made against your own conscience leaves a mark. At first, the mark is almost invisible, then another follows, and another, until one day you wake up living a life built almost entirely from other people's expectations. The chains were never placed around your wrists, they were placed around your decisions. Imagine an ancient tree growing on the edge of a cliff. Every day the wind pushes against it from a different direction. Some storms are gentle, others are violent enough to snap weaker trees in half. But the tree survives because its roots grow downward instead of outward. It does not chase the wind's approval. It holds tighter to the ground beneath it. Human character works exactly the same way. If your decisions are rooted in other people's emotions, every criticism will shake you. But when your values become your roots, even the strongest storm cannot move you. There is another truth that few people have the courage to admit. Some people become uncomfortable the moment you stop feeling guilty. Why? Because guilt gave them influence they never earned. When your guilt disappears, so does their ability to control your choices. Suddenly they accuse you of changing. They say you have become selfish, cold, or distant. But often the only thing that changed is that you finally stopped apologizing for having healthy boundaries. Growth almost always feels like rejection to people who benefited from the old version of you. Modern psychology calls this emotional conditioning. The Stoics simply called it slavery of the mind. Every time guilt successfully controls your actions, your brain learns that discomfort must always be avoided. But every time you respectfully hold your boundary despite feeling guilty, something extraordinary happens. Your mind becomes stronger than your emotions. The guilt slowly loses its authority because it discovers that you are no longer willing to obey it automatically. Freedom is not the absence of guilt. Freedom is refusing to let guilt become your master. Never forget this. Real love does not require you to abandon your character. It may ask for patience. It may ask for sacrifice. It may even ask for forgiveness. But it will never demand that you betray your deepest values just to keep someone else comfortable. Anyone who truly loves you may not always agree with your decisions, but they will never need your guilt to earn your loyalty. And now we come to the final two responses, the ones that separate calm people from truly unshakable people. Because the sixth response teaches you how to stay completely untouchable even when someone is determined to provoke you. Response number 6. Nothing you say can control my mind. Your words only have power if I give them permission. There is a level of strength that very few people ever reach. It is the moment you realize that no one, not your enemy, not your boss, not your family, not even the person you once loved, has the power to control your emotions without your silent permission. Most people spend their lives believing that other people make them angry, make them anxious, or make them feel worthless. But the Stoics saw through that illusion thousands of years ago. They understood a truth so powerful that it can completely change the way you move through life. People can insult your reputation. They can reject you. They can betray your trust. They can even walk away from you. But they cannot command your mind unless you hand them the keys yourself. Imagine a man standing in the middle of a crowded street while strangers shout every insult they can think of. One calls him a failure. Another laughs at his dreams. Someone else mocks his appearance. The crowd waits for him to explode because that is what people usually do. They expect anger. They expect revenge. They expect wounded pride. But instead, he smiles almost imperceptibly, looks at them with complete calm and says, "Your words only have power if I give them permission." Suddenly, the entire situation changes. The insults are still there, but they have nowhere to land. It is like firing arrows at someone wearing armor you cannot see. Eventually, even the attacker begins to question why nothing is working. Epictetus understood this lesson because he lived it. Before he became one of history's greatest philosophers, he was a slave. His master once twisted his leg so violently that it eventually became permanently damaged. According to the ancient accounts, Epictetus remained calm and simply warned him, "You are going to break it." Moments later, the bone snapped. He looked at his master and quietly said, "Didn't I tell you it would break?" Think about the magnitude of that moment. His body could be controlled. His freedom could be taken away. His future could be stolen. But his mind remained untouched. That is why history remembers the slave, while almost nobody remembers the man who believed he owned him. Marcus Aurelius carried this same principle into the heart of an empire. Every day he was criticized by politicians, betrayed by allies, judged by millions of people he would never meet, and burdened with decisions that could determine the fate of entire nations. Yet in his private journal, he reminded himself of something extraordinary. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. He wasn't denying pain. He was exposing a deeper truth. Between what happens to you and what happens inside you, there is always a choice. Most people never notice it because their emotions move faster than their awareness. The Stoic trains himself to see that invisible space, and inside that space, he discovers freedom. Picture a castle built high on a mountain. Its walls are thick enough to withstand armies. Storms strike it every winter. Lightning crashes against its towers. Enemies gather outside its gates year after year. Yet the castle remains standing because its strength was never determined by the weather outside. It was determined by the foundation beneath it. Your character is that foundation. Every insult is merely weather. Every criticism is another passing storm. The question is not whether storms will come. They always will. The question is whether you have built your identity on rock or on sand. If your self-worth depends on other people's opinions, every criticism feels like an earthquake. But if your identity is rooted in your values, even the harshest judgment becomes nothing more than distant thunder. Modern psychology calls this emotional regulation. The Stoics simply called it freedom. Neuroscience now tells us that when we pause before reacting, we weaken the automatic emotional pathways that keep us trapped in the same destructive patterns. Every time you choose awareness over impulse, your brain literally begins to change. Every calm response strengthens the part of your mind responsible for wisdom. Every emotional outburst strengthens the part responsible for survival. In other words, every difficult conversation becomes training. Every insult becomes an opportunity. Every provocation becomes another repetition in the gym where character is built. Now ask yourself one question. How many people have been living inside your mind without paying rent? How many sleepless nights have you given to someone who has already forgotten your name? How many times have you replayed a conversation while the other person moved on with their life hours ago? This is the hidden cost of giving strangers authority over your inner world. They steal your peace long after they have left the room. The Stoics refused to pay that price, and so should you. Remember this for the rest of your life. The strongest person in any room is not the one who can silence everyone else. It is the one whose peace cannot be stolen by anyone. Because the moment another person's words stop controlling your emotions, they stop controlling you. And when that happens, you become something very rare in this world. A person who is truly free. Now there is only one response left. The final response. The one that ancient Stoics considered the highest expression of self-mastery. It is not the loudest. It is not the harshest. But once you understand it, you will realize why the wisest people in history rarely needed the last word, because they had already won long before the conversation ended. Response number 7. Become someone who cannot be controlled. Phrase, you are free to judge me. You are not free to define me. Everything you have learned until this moment has been preparing you for this final response. The first 6 taught you how to stay calm, protect your boundaries, refuse manipulation, reject guilt, and guard your peace. But this final lesson reaches deeper than all the others combined. It is not about winning one conversation. It is about becoming the kind of person who can no longer be controlled by praise, criticism, approval, rejection, success, or failure. Because the greatest prison has never been built from iron bars. It has always been built from the desperate need for other people to approve of who you are. Think back to your own life for a moment. How many decisions did you make because you genuinely believed they were right? And how many were quietly influenced by the fear of being judged? Maybe you stayed silent because you were afraid people would laugh. Maybe you accepted disrespect because you feared losing someone. Maybe you abandoned a dream because someone convinced you that you were not capable enough. Most people never realize that the biggest battles of their lives were never fought against other people. They were fought inside their own minds, against the fear of other people's opinions. The tragedy is that millions of people die without ever becoming the person they truly wanted to be, simply because they spent their entire lives asking for permission from a world that never intended to give it. This is why your final response is so powerful. You do not argue. You do not defend yourself. You do not try to convince anyone that they misunderstood you. You simply look at them with complete peace and say, you are free to judge me. You are not free to define me. Read that sentence again. It carries no anger, no bitterness, no arrogance. It is the language of someone who has finally realized that identity is an inside job. Other people may create opinions about you, but opinions are not ownership. They belong to the person thinking them, not to the person being judged. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth, yet he constantly reminded himself that fame disappears, applause fades, and every generation eventually forgets the one before it. The people cheering your name today will be cheering someone else tomorrow. The people criticizing you today will eventually become memories themselves. So why surrender your peace to people who cannot even keep their own opinions forever? Marcus understood that the only reputation worth protecting was the one you carried inside your own conscience. Everything else belonged to time. History remembers another remarkable Stoic, Thrasea Pietus. He lived under Emperor Nero, a ruler who demanded obedience, admiration, and fear. Most senators survived by flattering the emperor and pretending to agree with everything he said. Thrasea refused. He remained respectful, but he would not betray his principles simply to keep his position. Eventually, Nero sentenced him to death. As friends gathered around him, expecting panic or despair, Thrasea remained astonishingly calm. His body could be executed, but his integrity could not. In that final moment, the emperor possessed absolute power over his life, yet none over his character. That is the highest form of freedom a human being can ever achieve. Imagine an eagle flying high above the mountains. Down below, people argue about where it should fly. Some say it is flying too high. Others insist it should stay lower. Some admire its strength. Others envy its freedom. But the eagle never circles back to answer any of them. It does not interrupt its flight to defend itself against every opinion shouted from the ground. Why? Because creatures that were born to soar waste their lives if they become obsessed with the voices that never left the valley. The higher your purpose becomes, the quieter other people's opinions begin to sound. Modern psychology now confirms something the Stoics understood centuries ago. The happiest and most emotionally resilient people are not those who receive the most approval. They are the ones whose self-worth depends the least on external validation. They no longer measure themselves by applause or criticism because they have built an identity rooted in values instead of opinions. This is emotional freedom. It is not the absence of judgment. It is the absence of dependence on judgment. So let me leave you with one final question. When you reach the end of your life, whose voice do you want to have followed? The crowd that changed its opinions every season, or the quiet voice inside you that always knew who you were meant to become? One path earns temporary approval but permanent regret. The other may cost you comfort, popularity, and easy acceptance, but it gives you something infinitely more valuable. It gives you yourself. That is the true lesson of Stoicism. It was never about winning arguments. It was never about having the perfect comeback. It was never about making other people feel small. It was about becoming so deeply rooted in wisdom that no insult could shake you, no manipulation could control you, no praise could corrupt you, and no criticism could define you. The moment you stop asking the world who you are, you become someone the world can no longer control. And that is real freedom. The Stoics never taught us how to win arguments. They taught us something far greater, how to master ourselves. Because the moment you stop seeking approval, stop fearing criticism, and stop reacting to every insult, you become someone the world can no longer control. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, remember this. Your greatest power is not your words. It is your self-control. The loudest person is rarely the strongest. The calmest one usually is. If this video gave you a new perspective, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to build an unshakable mind through the timeless wisdom of Stoicism, subscribe and join us on this journey. Until next time, protect your peace, master your mind, and let your character speak louder than your words.